Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with the talk we've all been waiting for. Well, maybe some of you, I don't know. Bruckner Symphony number 9. Oh boy, this is a complicated issue because, of course, Bruckner died before he finished it. And then there's a big question. Should we listen to a completion or should we not listen to a completion? And as you may already know, I have some very strong opinions about that, which I'm going to share with you. But I'm going to do things a little differently. Normally, I would sit here with like a stack of 400 recordings of it and we'd whiz through them. It would take forever. I'm not doing that. I'm not doing that at all because the situation with Bruckner's Ninth is actually rather simple. Most people do it very, very well. For some reason, I don't know why. I can't think of many performances that are out and out failures, although there are a few, like Mario Vanzago, who's a failure in everything. And, some of these other schmagegi Bruckner guys who just stretch things out to unconscionable lengths. But the interesting thing about the Ninth is that so many people have done it multiple times, and it can get very, very, very confusing. So I'm going to run down a list really quickly. We're going to get this out of the way at the beginning. So those of you who are just looking for recordings of the Ninth can grab one of these and you'll be perfectly happy. And then I can blather on as long as I want at the end, and you can cut me off whenever you want and you'll be perfectly happy. It works either way. So let's just talk about recordings. People who have done multiples and singletons. All right, the singleton recordings that you need to know about, basically there are not too many really that are worth having. The first was Zubin Mehta with the Vienna Philharmonic on Decca, a magnificent recording that's held up amazingly well for decades. First class in every way. The second one is the new Manfred Honeck one. With the Pittsburgh Symphony on reference recordings. It has the most amazing final adagio. I don't know how he handles transitions and tempos, but it goes so quickly, but it takes so long. I can't even explain the masterly conducting behind his control of pace in that performance. It's absolutely magnificent. So those are two singleton versions. And then we talk about people who've done it more than once, which is like most people, all the serious Bruckner people, and they're all worth hearing. Even Leonard Bernstein, who was by no means a Bruckner person, did the Ninth twice. There's one on Sony and there's one on DG. It's an unconventional interpretation, but it's very good. It's really worth having. The very slow scherzo is really powerful and interesting. It really is. And the rest of it's very expressive and beautifully done, and it's perfectly fine. But now, if I had my stack here, you would see all the boxes, of Bruckner cycles, because you have to talk about all the Bruckner cycles. So what are the ones by people who've done Bruckner cycles? And all these people have done multiple ones. First, Giulini. He didn't do a complete Bruckner cycle, but he did the Ninth twice, once in Chicago for EMI, and then with the Vienna Philharmonic on DG. It's magnificent. His Vienna Ninth is slow and dark and expressionistic, and in some ways it may be the best of all. It's absolutely amazing. Karajan did it a couple of times, very well both times, really did. Haitink, did he do it more than once? Probably. I can't even remember. But yeah, but he did his first one. Oh, he did it twice. Yeah, both with the Concertgebouw. And the first one with the Concertgebouw was better than the digital one. So if you're going to go for Haitink and you have his Bruckner box, it's got his first night. It's marvelous. And I particularly like the amended timpani parts in the coda of the first movement, where it's going dum, bum, ba-dum, ba-da. And then underneath the trombones are going bum, ba-dum, ba-dum, ba-dum. Bruckner only wrote a timpani roll. Haitink has his timpanist double the trombones. So it's dum, ba-dum, ba-dum. Oh, it works really, really well. It sounds like some dinosaur lumbering across the finish line. Absolutely terrific. So you've got Haitink, who's done several. Günter Wand, he did like, I don't know, 5, maybe? Starting with Cologne and then NDR in Berlin. He did every 5 minutes he did Bruckner's Ninth, and RCA was there to record it. And I have no idea why. I did once an April Fool's talk on Bruckner. There was nothing but a box of Bond Bruckner Ninths. There's a zillion of them. The only one that's not great is the live from Lubeck one, not because it's not a wonderful performance, but because the cathedral acoustic messes up the balances, especially of the horns. So if you want Günter Wand, and by all means you should hear his ninth, get a Günter Wand. Get a bunch, collect them and trade them, get a stack of them, who knows? So he's good. Skrovichevsky, he did it twice. He did a fabulous one on reference recordings in Minnesota, and then there's his standard Saarbrücken, whatever orchestra that was, on Öms, which is, I mean, they're both absolutely splendid. He was a great Bruckner 9 guy. However, if I had to pick one, just one, the one I would choose as my favorite Bruckner ninth is Jochum with the Staatskapelle Dresden. Now, of course, he did it twice. There's the DG one, and this is the EMI Warner one with the Staatskapelle Dresden. Why? Very simple. It is the most savage performance of the ninth ever recorded, bar none. I mean, there are moments in this performance, in the scherzo, that would not sound out of place in Stravinsky's The Rite of Spring. There is no other performance that highlights the music's expressionistic modernity like Jochum does. And the Adagio is as spiritually intense as anyone has ever done it. It's an absolutely amazing Bruckner ninth. Then there's another sort of singleton version that I always found fascinating that's worth talking about, and that's Kubelik's live one on Orfeo. That has, first of all, the horns crack at the very last bit of the Adagio, which is like, oh God, you think it's going to be perfect and they're going to make it, but there's that one little tiny mistake. But it's an amazing performance. The most remarkable thing about it is that in the Adagio, during the cosmic noise, you know, that ba da da da, and the horns are going da da blah, you know, and the strings all have tremolos. He plays them as measured tremolos, which, if you look at the score, makes sense. I mean, it's technically correct, but it sounds very odd because it's going chicka 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 da 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 chicka 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 chicka, because the number of tremolo things, extra tails on the notes is the same as the trumpet parts when they're going da da da. They're like was it 36 64th notes or 128th note tremolos, but he makes them play them that way. And boy, does that sound different. That is so peculiar, but it is a very great Bruckner ninth for all of its tiny little imperfections. Still, Jochum is your man. Jochum on EMI or Warner with the Staatskapelle Dresden. It comes in the box. It came coupled with the Third Symphony. It's a twofer. You can get it. It was released singly on a cheapy, EMI Seraphim disc. It's available any number of ways. So Jochum is your man for the ninth. And with that, we are done talking about recordings of Bruckner's ninth. Wasn't that easy? I know there are a million others. There's Barenboim. He did it 4 times. There's Schulte. I mean, most of them are very good. They really are. So I am not going to start, getting into the craziness of the stack. And quite frankly, if you have comments and you want to talk about specific musical issues, feel free. I'm more than happy to hear them. But, don't give me my favorite is why, and no, so-and-so did that, and there's another one by hoo-ha. I mean, come on, guys. I mean, it's enough, isn't it? Isn't it just really enough of these things? I think it is, Anyway, so now we come to the question of the finale. And that question is really very, very, very simple. Should anyone finish the finale, and should we listen to the Bruckner ninth with the finale? The answer is no. Absolutely not. The finale is horrible, and all the completions of it are stupid and worthless for a huge number of reasons. The best way, if you're curious about what the finale could have been, what went into it, is to listen to Harnoncourt, who also did a very good Bruckner ninth, by the way. But he did, for RCA in his recording in Vienna, a lecture demonstration of just where Bruckner had got to in the finale. And so he plays all of the playable bits and then gives a little talk about what would have been in the middle or what joins them. And it's really very interesting. It's extremely interesting. But what it demonstrates, for me anyway, conclusively, however Harnoncourt might be about what could have been, is that it was bad. It was going very badly. I mean, that's why Bruckner spent years on it and probably never finished it. My feeling about the Ninth finale is as follows. First, we know that Bruckner, toward the end of his life, was feeble and mentally confused and very weak, and that's what the music sounds like, quite honestly. I don't think it's representative of him. There is nothing in that finale that is anywhere near the quality of the music in the first three movements. And it really seems to me, that's obvious. I just listen to it and I just go, ugh, it's horrible. But, he was absolutely lost in that finale. Whether he finished it or not doesn't make any difference, or could have finished it or wrote it. The fact of the matter is that Bruckner wrote out everything. And once he finished it, that's when composition started with Bruckner. That wasn't the end. He finished it, and then he looked at it, and he let it sit, and then he thought about it, then he agonized, then he changed it, then he revised it, then he did this, and then he did that. How many Bruckner symphonies, had finale issues and that didn't find what he thought was the ideal shape of his finale until years after he theoretically finished it? The third, the fourth, the eighth. There's no reason to assume that had Bruckner finished it, that would have been the finale of the Ninth. And there's a lot of reason to consider the fact that it might not have been. And I'm going to now get into those, and we'll talk about that a bit. So the second issue is, what kind of a symphony was the Ninth going to be? If you look at the Seventh, for example, the Seventh is front-weighted. It's a first movement symphony. In the outer movements, the weight is in the first movement. In the Eighth, it's just the opposite. The weight is in the finale. What was the Ninth supposed to be? It wasn't going to have, after that first movement and that adagio, was he going to write a finale of similar weight? Well, he didn't, because the finale as it exists is in no way comparable to the majesty and grandeur and power and intensity of the first movement, not even close. And it's coming right after that adagio. So what are you going to do after that adagio? It's a real problem. And it's a problem that Bruckner did not even begin to address. He was simply writing it out to see what it looked like. And then I feel the composition process would have really gotten going, and he would have figured out what kind of a symphony the Ninth was. A first movement symphony, a grand finale symphony, and how does he make the finale a grand finale? There's a lot of discussion about using the Te Deum as a substitute for the finale, which is quite unsatisfactory and not correct in my view. But it does bring home one important fact, which is that Bruckner was not clear on what shape the finale was going to take. How, if he wanted to make the Ninth a finale symphony, he was going to make the finale a suitably big statement to match what had come before. And if he wasn't, there's nothing more problematic than Bruckner's lighter finales. There really isn't. They're so misunderstood. The finale of the Sixth got dogged for years. The finale of the Seventh, some people think is too light for the work. It's so completely different. And I really think that to say that just because it exists in a sketch that you can fill in and finish, that means it's the finale. It's not. I think it's a completely unsatisfying solution to the problems posed by the rest of the symphony, and I don't even think that Bruckner had begun to grapple with them. He was in no state of mind, or physically or mentally, no state of health that would have permitted him to actually finish that symphony in a satisfactory way. However, the biggest issue comes from the status of the completions that exist, which I've heard, all of which suck. Really, they're just awful. They're garbage. They're worthless. First of all, what kind of hubris allows people to put themselves in the place of Bruckner to finish something which was already in big trouble. Let's put it that way. They weren't going to fix it. They weren't going to make it. They were going to make it, well, we'll make it as performable as Bruckner got to it, and then we get to write a coda, a real Bruckner coda. Well, how do you know that the real Bruckner coda would sound like all the other Bruckner codas? The problem with all of these kinds of completions is that geniuses, and Bruckner was one of those, always do something which is new and unexpected. But their archaeological expeditions, which is what this is, only do things based on previous precedent. They can only do what Bruckner did before. They can never imagine what leaps he might have took in the future to do something astonishing and brilliant and satisfying with the finale. So for that reason alone, all of these finales are completely unsatisfactory. But even more than that, there is a problem with the way Bruckner is regarded by his acolytes, the members of the Bruckner cult, all of whom are the ones who are busy completing versions of the finale of the Ninth. The problem is this. All of the Bruckner cult members think that they were smarter than Bruckner. They think that Bruckner was a poor victim, a hapless soul who was simply the channel by which the message of God was funneled. He was just receiving the divine mystery, the divine message, and pouring it out with all of the defects and frailties to which flesh is liable. And so anybody can step in and do better than he did and fix what he couldn't fix and see the things he couldn't see. That's what they think. And they do it on the basis of helping him. In fact, and this is what's fascinating, the Bruckner people today are in exactly the same position as the much reviled Schock brothers or Ferdinand Loewe, all those people who they spit on for having messed up Bruckner's scores behind his back. And that's why, for example, Benjamin Korsvet published the Gutmann 1888 Bruckner Fourth. It doesn't sound like Bruckner. It's all getting rehabilitated because Bruckner was involved, because they meant well. They're doing the same thing. They're second-guessing Bruckner. And for me, if you really believe Bruckner was as great as people say he was, the first thing you do is respect his decisions. Simple as that. And if that means that you hear less, that you don't publish 400 versions of the same symphony in critical editions, allegedly, then so be it. There's only as much as he approved and finished and felt satisfied with himself. And the finale of the Ninth is the ultimate case in point. But you have to remember, finishing the finale of the Ninth, getting to tinker with Bruckner, is the ultimate sacramental act. These people get to transubstantiate, the body and blood of Bruckner by finishing the finale of the Ninth. It's irresistible. But that has a very, very interesting consequence. The consequence is that because every single note that Bruckner wrote is sacred, is holy writ, is the essence of mystical communion with the Supreme Being, that means everything has to go into that finale. And the result is that it gets longer and longer and longer and longer. And Bruckner, of course, was nothing if not able to make cuts, to make things shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter on reflection. When he thought about it, when he had a chance maybe even to hear it, to play it through, to know what it was going to sound like, to decide what his real conception was going to be. So just because Bruckner wrote it and it's part of a sketch doesn't mean it would have wound up in the finished finale. And the result is that that finale, as it's finished, is so long and so tedious. It's horrible. Why is it horrible? Well, the opening theme is one of the ugliest things Bruckner ever wrote. It's just a blah, ba-da, 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 blah, ba-da, 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 ba-da. It's horrible. And its horribleness is compounded by the fact that it is also the thematic substance of his second subject of the three important Bruckner subjects in most of his movements. And it just sounds just as awful played slowly as it does played loudly and in unison by the rest of the orchestra. There is only one other movement where that's the case, where that second subject is so plainly the same theme as the first subject or based on something from that. And that's in the first movement of Symphony Number 0, where it sounds just as awful and which Bruckner disavowed. And I have a feeling he would have just as soon disavowed this finale because he was doing the same thing. You know, Bruckner had this kind of personality. When he got stuck, that didn't mean he stopped writing. It just meant he kept on repeating himself. Now, like his counting mania, he had a mania. So what did he do? He would just repeat things over and over again. And in order to keep things going in drafting out that finale, he just kept repeating himself, that same horrible theme that opens the finale. And even more than that, he had a wonderful sense of proportion. I think he knew what he wanted to put in there as his second subject or how long it might have been, but he hadn't come up with the material for it. So he just sort of adapted the theme of the opening, the first subject, and turned it into the second subject, and voila, he's filled up the space. Because so much of Bruckner is based on a sort of modular construction with these blocks of sound. And a lot of what he did was in sort of chiseling away and finding their correct proportions. And he had not done that with this finale yet. I don't even think, like I said, he's worked out the thematic substance of it correctly or in a satisfying way. So I think all of the completions of the Ninth are awful. And of course, the fact of the matter is the symphony works perfectly well in 3 movements, even though we know that there was a finale, even though we know that wasn't Bruckner's ultimate intention. As a 3-movement symphony, it is a perfectly balanced masterpiece. It just is. Now, there is one performance of the completed Ninth that is, I think, kind of worth hearing, and it's interesting. And that's Simon Rattle's, believe it or not, with the Berlin Philharmonic. And the reason for that is because he rethinks the symphony as a finale symphony, as something that's headed towards a 4th movement. And the result is that he underplays or minimizes the first movement and the adagio. They are quicker, lighter, sort of faster performances. It's quite surprising. So that when that finale shows up, it seems to make a lot more sense, at least in that particular completion. That doesn't make it a valid Bruckner experience, but it does mean that he gave the whole thing some thought. And it turns out that, he understood at least that what happens with the finale necessarily affects what you do with the first 3 movements. Because there's going to be a fundamentally different aspect to them when you are headed somewhere than when you're not. And so the performances in 3 movements, all one way or another, know that they're going to end with the adagio. And Rattle's is the only performance I've heard that knows that the symphony does not end with the adagio. But what it ends with, as I said, remains completely unsatisfying and unfortunate. And so I despise any completion of Bruckner's Ninth. I really do. I think they're all just vile, and I avoid them like death, and you should too. There are so many great performances of the 3-movement Ninth as it stands, and we don't need more. Bruckner's death meant something before he finished it. If you really believe that he was the voice of God, then God called him home before he could mess up the Ninth by leaving it with a crappy finale. That's my feeling about Bruckner's Ninth. So keep on listening, folks. Thank you for joining me. Take care.